Show episode 89. We're almost reaching 90 with the next episode.
Oh yeah.
And today we're doing a very special band. We're talking about Generation X.
Yeah. Generation X is one of my favorite of the UK punk bands. They were kind of different than the other bands. We'll talk about that.
They were very
And
different.
yeah, and of course, the lead singer Billy Idol went on to international stardom in the '80s.
But after he left, the band still continued, right? They got like a
Well,
different lead
no,
singer?
it was done after he left.
It was done, yeah.
They
They
had
got
some
other.
lineup changes, but
They were
they
never good.
well they had lineup changes between the second and third album, and then they actually broke up in between. I'll get into all that, but then Idol went off on his own, and that was it. He never went
Yeah.
back.
But I remember seeing them in a bunch of things. All right, so what you got for me today?
All right, well, to understand Generation X, you got to talk about Billy Idol, obviously. So
Yeah.
he was born William Michael Albert Broad on November 30th, 1955, in Stanmore, Middlesex, England. His mother was Irish and his father was British, and they were kind of like a religious family. He used to go to church as a kid, but in 1958, he moved with his parents out to Patchogue, Long Island, from England. Okay, so he actually spent some time here in New York as a kid. He also lived in Rockville Center in Nassau County for a little while as a kid. At that point, his little sister Jane was born. She was actually born here in America. But in '62, I believe his father's work took him back to England, and they moved to the Dorking, Surrey area. Now, he went to school there as a kid, but in 1971, they relocated to Bromley in the southeast section of London. That's where Billy went to the Ravensbourne School for Boys, and later he would attend Worthing High School for Boys in West Sussex. He was kind of like a average middle class kid, really into music, kind of quiet, kind of well, a little withdrawn in some ways. He used to wear glasses. He was like not the crazy dude that you think
That
of
we
today.
know now.
But he always loved rock and roll. He always tells the story. The first time he ever got laid was to the song "Mony Mony" by Tommy Jansen and Shondells. And
Did he redo that song?
yeah, he did it when he was solo. Yeah, "Mony Mony." But and that was the reason he wanted to do the song. But he was an average kid, really into music. He taught himself how to play guitar a little bit, but he was mostly concerned about school. He was average in school. In fact, that's how he got the name Idol. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in '71, he relocated to Bromley and went to school. Now, in '75, he attended the University of Sussex to pursue an English degree.
All right.
So he tried college for about a year, but then he dropped out. Okay,
So he was kind of
1976.
pretty well educated, right? Like he wasn't a dumb guy. Like he got some pretty good education.
No. He had full schooling. He wasn't a high school dropout, but he tried college and it didn't work out. I mean, if you think about what was going on in England in '75, '76, there weren't that many jobs. Okay, and the punk scene was big, and it's something that was starting, and it's just something that attracted him. He went at that point to form the Bromley Contingent. Now, we've talked about the Bromley Contingent a few times. They were a group of Sex Pistols fans that kind of all hung out together and went to all the Sex Pistols shows, followed them all over the country. And they became kind of like, an entourage almost with the Sex Pistols. They would hang out with them and stuff like that. There's that famous episode of the Bill Grundy show in England where they had the Sex Pistols on and the Bromley Contingent was in the background, and that's when like Steve Jones like cursed and everything, and they got in trouble for that. Susie Sue from Susie and the Banshees would be a member of the Contingent as well. A lot of people in there went on to actually form their own bands.
So far, so good, man.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of
Now,
information.
you know, he, like I said, he was a big rock and roll fan. Elvis was a hero of his. He got the name Idol, the idea for it, from his teachers saying on the report card that he was idle, IDLE,
Yeah, that he never showed up.
that he never showed up or never did his homework or whatever, didn't have an interest. Um, he also he knew that if he used that name, which is something he wanted to go by, he'd have to change it because he thought that Eric Idle from Monty Python would give him a hard time. Okay, because that was IDLE. So he changed
Yeah.
it to IDOL. Now, like I said, he taught himself guitar, and he joined up at that point once he left school with the West London '60s retro rock band Chelsea. All right,
Yeah.
the band's frontman was a guy named Gene October, and he's really kind of credited. I think Idol even admits it for kind of like inventing Idol's style, like giving him his look. Okay, he convinced him to start wearing contact lenses, get rid of his glasses.
Yeah, but Gene was the front man, right?
Gene,
Was
right,
he?
Gene was the front man. Billy was brought in to play guitar.
Yeah.
Okay, and he said to October said to Idol, you got to change your look a little bit. So he got rid of his glasses. He started wearing contacts. He dyed his hair blonde and he kept it really short, almost
Yeah.
like a crew cut, almost. Okay, and other members in the band of Chelsea was Tony James, a friend of Billy's on bass.
Yeah.
John Toe was the drummer. All right, and you had Gene October singing. But after a few rehearsals, the band played. There was some support gigs in West London and Manchester. They kind of did like '60s rock covers. They didn't really have any originals, but it kind of became clear after a short time that the band wasn't getting along with Gene October. Okay, I think that October kind of felt like Idol and James were trying to take over the band, or they were like, they were coming at him with originals, and I think he felt like it was his band and they were being too dominant. But the chemistry for these guys really wasn't right. And in the middle of a gig in November of that year, in '76, Billy Idol and Tony James and Toe kicked Gene October off the stage in the middle of a show.
Yeah, that's crazy. But
So
he
how do
told
you,
the,
your band kicks the lead singer off the
but
stage?
you know the problem? He thought that these guys were very creative. That's the thing.
Well, yes,
You
I
know,
think
like
when
Billy
Idol
Idol and
when I
Tall were very
when Idol
creative.
and when Idol and James got together and started songwriting, yeah,
Yeah.
there was some chemistry there, and but for some reason, I think Gene October, felt it was his band and would write the songs or whatever. I don't know. I don't really know the whole story, but
Yeah, because he considered them lightweight. He considered the song they were writing too lightweight.
yeah,
That's what he
yeah,
called
right.
them.
That's true. He did. Yeah, he thought they were like maybe too poppy or something
Yeah,
like
too,
that for
that's
what he wanted.
exactly what he told Too
Yeah,
Poppy.
yeah. Now, once they kicked Gene October out of the band, that was the end of the band. Chelsea would actually go on with Gene October and different members. They would play for a while. I think they actually still do play around. But immediately when the other three guys left, they started Generation X. Now, it was a name that they got from a book in Billy Idol's house that his mother was reading. All right, Tony James came over one night and there was a book out and he questioned it and she said she was reading it and he said that's a great name for a band. So they took that name and immediately they got some management, a guy named Andrew Sizowski. Okay, he was also an accountant, so he was going to do both functions of the
Was he
band.
like Polish or Russian or anything?
Sizowski,
With
I'd
that
say,
last
I
name?
think he was. I think he was Polish. Yeah,
Polish, right?
yeah. But Billy Idol at this point, he gave up playing guitar, at least his lead guitar. Okay, he still plays guitar. You see him in videos and stuff like that, but he just gave
Yeah.
up being the guitarist for Generation X and would be the front man. Okay, at that point, they needed a guitarist, so they got Bob Durwood Andrews, formerly of the Fulham band Paradox, to
Yeah.
join up. So now you got Toe on drums, you got Billy singing, you got Tony James on bass, and you got Durwood. on guitar. And Durwood's a very good guitarist.
Yeah.
They played their first gig on December 10th, 1976 at the Central School of Art and Design. At that point, they didn't have that many originals. They were doing mostly covers. But their manager, Andrew Sazowski, recently took over as the manager from the newly opened Roxy Club. Okay, the Roxy.
So they got
And,
in.
yeah, well, they were the first band to play there.
Yeah.
Okay, the place had just opened. Their manager took over, so it was a great connection to have. The second gig they ever played was the very first gig at the Roxy, and the Roxy would be one of these places that would feature a lot of punk bands. Okay, Don Letts, I believe, was the DJ there, so he was playing the reggae and the punk.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and all that. Yeah. It was after this gig that they decided to really concentrate on originals, and they stopped doing covers.
They started writing.
And they wrote very quickly. In early '77, Sazowski would pass these management duties over to two guys. They were going to have like a co-managing company. All right, a guy named Stuart Joseph, who was mostly a promoter, and then Sounds Magazine journalist Josh Ingham. He would kind of handle the business end of things and trying to get them a record contract and get interest in them and stuff like that. Sazowski decided to just concentrate on managing the Roxy. That's why he left. On February 16th, 1977, the band went into the Delane Lee Studios in Wembley, and it's kind of like the north side of London. Chiswick Records was interested in them, and they were sponsoring these demos that they were going to do. So Idle and James, they had an interesting system that was kind of different when it came to songwriting. Billy was the front man, the singer.
Yeah.
He actually wrote a lot of the music. Okay, he would write a lot of the guitar parts and stuff like that, and then they would kind of work their way around with bass and drums. Tony James, the bassist, wrote the lyrics that Billy would sing. So it's kind of an interesting opposite of what you normally see, right?
Yeah, of course. That's very strange.
Yeah. Now,
and at this point, they also got a new manager, right?
Yes, they got two new guys. Okay, they got two guys co-managing, Stuart Joseph and Josh Ingham.
Okay.
Right. Sazowski just decided to manage the club. That was it.
Yeah.
So, lyrics that Tony James was writing at first were kind of like political.
Yeah.
Somewhat in the sense of like what the Clash was writing. He would write things criticizing the National Front, which was a big right-wing group at the time.
Yeah.
And also he in some of his lyrics he criticized England's involvement in Northern Ireland. But these kind of early songs with these political lyrics would be dropped. They would never be released or not officially on any albums. They decided to go in a different direction, write stuff that was maybe a little more accessible, which was, different than what other punk bands were doing. But I'll get into that more. Now, one track they had was called Your Generation, and another track was called Listen. And these two songs would be pressed on a kind of blank labeled vinyl, white vinyl. And at first they did 250 copies. They ran out. And then they did an additional 500. And they would basically give this out as promotion at clubs and record stores. And they kind of like shopped it to different labels.
Yeah.
So when they go to a label, they say, hey, here's us, here's a record, put it on.
Put it on.
Now, by mid-March 77, the band was touring England heavily. And at a particular gig at the University of Leicester, Durwood got hit in the head with a beer bottle. Someone chucked the bottle at him, and it actually hurt him pretty bad. He had to go to the hospital. They had to stop the show. Okay, this was the punk time. This was in England. They were still touring extensively. Working in the studio a little bit and touring a lot. They did their first international date in mid-April in Paris. Okay, at a show, and that was a show they did with the Jam and the Police.
That's pretty impressive. Think about that. You just started and you're playing with the Jam and the Police.
I think this co-management company they had between Ingham and Joseph was very good.
Yeah.
I think it worked for them in the early years, getting them good shows and stuff like that. They ended up recording their first BBC live show also at that Paris international show they did. Shortly after the band agreed to let drummer John Toe go, all right, James and Idle kind of felt that, the direction the band was going, his image didn't fit, and his drumming style really didn't fit with the band.
Yeah, it
So
was
he
time to
actually
get
ended up,
somebody else.
he ended up joining a band called Alternative TV, which had some success in the
Yeah,
punk scene.
they're another good band.
Yeah, they are
Alternative.
actually. I have one of their albums. Um, Billy Idol and Tony James at this point, they began like a publicized auditioning process. Okay, it was well known that Generation X needed a drummer, so they tried out a lot of people, and they ended up getting Mark Laff. He was the drummer in the band Subway Sect. He left them in May of '77 to join Generation X. Now, between June and August, Laff rehearsed extensively that whole summer with Generation X to become familiar with their songs and their style.
All right.
In mid-July, the band signed a contract with Chrysalis Records, so they finally got the deal they wanted. And actually, Idol would stay with Chrysalis through, I think,
Even after, even after.
like all like that Rebel Yell stuff and his first solo album and everything, that was all on Chrysalis. But we'll see why. We're going to go into that
All
towards
right.
the end.
So they're recording an album now, right? Their full album.
Yeah. Now this is they were going to go with some singles at first.
Yeah, of course.
They went into they went into the Wessex Sound Studios in North London, and they were working with a producer named Bill Price, but it didn't work out. They kind of like did some recordings, listened to them, and said, "Nah, you don't get our sound." They ended up asking Chrysalis for a new person to work with them. They ended up with Phil Wainman, and at the end of July, they shifted over to the Morgan Studios in the Willesden section and recorded Your Generation as a first single. Okay. Now, Phil Wainman, even though he was a much better fit than Bill Price, he had his doubts about Generation X.
Yeah, he didn't think they were
he
musically good.
He didn't like Billy Idol singing for some reason. And he also thought that Mark Laff's drumming was terrible. All right. But they soldiered on, whatever it was. They were able to work through the differences. Now, Your Generation was released as a single in September of '77, with the B-side being a song called Day by Day. It got to number 36 on the UK charts, and immediately off the bat, it was shit on. Elton John himself actually critiqued it in a Record Mirror magazine and called it dreadful garbage. All right. Now, I'll be honest with you. If I was in Generation X and I released a single and Elton John said it was shit, I would be happy. I'd make a T-shirt of that review.
Yeah, it's a dreadful fucking sound.
Yeah, because by '77, John was pretty dreadful himself, actually. But however, even though John was saying this, Mark Bolan, who had his own TV show, and he was in the middle of making a comeback,
we talked about that.
Yes,
Remember?
we did. We talked about how Billy Idol was on his show, right?
Yeah.
They ended up asking Generation X to come on the Mark TV show, which was like a variety show that he did every afternoon. Now, them going on the show was huge. Was huge. Okay, it pushed them to be way bigger. So it was a very well-liked performance, and they recorded it at the Granada Studios in Manchester. Now, an interesting thing happened. Mark Laff used Granada Studios drum kit to do the performance. Okay, which is common. Drummers don't like to carry all their shit around, so they borrowed a drum kit. All right, for the studio. But at the end of the gig, Mark Laff made off with it. He just took off with the drum kit.
And so what happened?
They ended up being banned. The whole band was banned for
10 years.
For 10 years. That's funny. For stealing a fucking drum kit.
It must have been a good drum kit. It must have been
Oh, they
better
had,
than what he
I'm sure
had.
they had the best. That's probably why he wanted to take it. It was probably better than what he had. Now, it was around this time that some punk rockers and competing bands didn't know what to make of Generation X. First of all, one thing the band did that I think it's one of the greatest things about them, but at the time was viewed upon badly, is they actually admitted and talked about their influences. They were influenced by the Who. They were influenced by the Beatles. They were
Yeah,
influenced by the Stones. Okay, but this was something that the UK punk bands were not doing. They were kind of like saying, look, everything before us sucks, except for a few people here and there. But mostly like, we're starting a whole new thing. And I mean, I get it. Okay. Like the Clash had a song called 1977 that was out. And one of the lyrics is no Elvis, Beatles, or the Rolling Stones in 1977. So, but Billy Idol and Tony James would say, yeah, we love the Who.
yeah,
Okay. They used to do Can't Explain by the Who,
yeah.
a very early Who song. And but it didn't sit well with the emerging kind of like punk elitists of the time, okay, and they would get criticized by like Johnny Rotten and stuff like that. Didn't
Yeah.
take them seriously, but I think they're one of the best bands. But um,
I think
Image,
they just did their own thing. They didn't care.
well,
They
yeah, they
did their
didn't
own
care.
thing.
I don't think they cared what the other bands said, that they weren't punk enough or something like that.
And
Okay, I
and who's the biggest star? Billy Idol or Johnny Rotten?
well, yeah, I mean, Billy Idol went on to the way
Think
bigger
about it.
stardom,
Yeah.
But Image within Generation X was very important. Okay, they were very conscious of how that can push them as a band. So what they did was co-manager John Ingham. He introduced them to graphic artist Barney Bubbles. And Barney Bubbles helped them create the cover art for the Your Generation single.
Yeah.
It was based on kind of like a Russian designer named L. Lisitsky. Okay, Lisitsky was popular in the 1920s, and he had these kind of like geometric designs on that. That was the influence Generation X. If you look at their like album covers or some of their singles, there's always kind of like lines, like geometric
Yeah.
lines and stuff like that. The Buzzcocks had a similar kind of
Oh yeah,
design
the
too, in
mascot.
what they
But
did.
they also did that to sell like merch, like T-shirts and
Yeah,
stuff, which
yeah,
was
yeah. I mean, it
kind of
was
brilliant.
they were actually a little bit ahead of the curve in that.
Yeah.
Okay, they actually sold, uh, you know, customized T-shirts and things like that to help promote them.
Yeah.
Also, this guy Bubbles, he would design their newspaper advertisements for when they were playing shows. They put an ad out, and their posters. They had
Yeah.
posters for sale too. And I think this kind of like I think other bands might have been a little more jealous of them in a way,
Yeah.
because they kind of had their shit together more than
Yeah.
some of the other bands.
But
And there's
Mike,
nothing
you
wrong
want
with that.
yeah, you want to hear something? But they were also very unique looking. Like when you saw them, they looked like very like, yo, I want to hang out with these guys because they were very like they were young, but they were very cool looking. Like
Yeah,
like
well, they
ahead of the
had
time.
yeah, I mean, sometimes Billy Idol would wear like ruffled shirts and things like that. Nobody
Yeah.
was really looking like that too much. John Lydon had an interesting look
Yeah.
compared to the other punks. Like he didn't wear like a motorcycle jacket much or
No.
anything like that. He would wear like the dress shirts with vests and things like that. And,
Yeah.
yeah, and Idol had his own look. They changed their look kind of like often.
Yeah.
They went for different styles depending on the album that was out.
Yeah.
But now, because of this top 40 success with Your Generation, the band became one of the first punk bands to ever go on top of the pops. Uh, their performance was very well received by the mainstream media,
Yep.
and they were kind of like regarded as a punk band that could really make it, that could be like, sell a lot of albums.
Okay.
And but I think that had to do with they were kind of like less nihilistic, less negative than some of the other bands. They
Yeah, of
didn't,
course.
they weren't really like snarling and scary like the Sex Pistols were. Okay, but and I think that it made the mainstream like them in a way. Okay, the mainstream rock journalists and stuff like that. Now, this caused a further divide, though, among punk rockers in the scene, okay, as to if Generation X was kind of like the real thing or just posers. In some circles, they were considered posers. Because people said, oh, they're not working class enough because they didn't come from like a very working class background. All right. One particular article that was written by New Musical Express's Tony Parsons.
Yeah.
He was interviewing Billy Idol early on in Generation X's career, and they met at a pub. And in the article, they talk about, Idol shows up for the interview, and Tony Parsons says, what do you want to drink? And he asks for an orange juice. So,
He
he didn't drink.
he didn't drink.
He didn't drink that much. And it
Why does
also
that
kind of
name
says
sound
that
familiar to me? Tony Parsons.
Tony Parsons, yeah, he might have done some work for Rolling Stone, maybe, or something in America. I know the name too.
I think we definitely used the name in other things.
We might have mentioned it.
Yeah. So they go out and they're drinking, and he order orange juice, and everybody shits on him.
Yeah. So he made fun of him for that, and also there was some question that he asked him in the interview about like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle, and he kind of like Billy Idol kind of rejected it. Now, I don't really buy this because if you know the reputation of Billy Idol, even in the Generation X days, okay, he ended up on some heavy drugs. So he was partying.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But he was also getting pussy left and right because, look, let's face it, Billy Idol's a good-looking guy.
Yeah.
He was the front man of Generation X, and he's just known – he's known as a hound. He's known as that. Okay,
but you know what? It was kind of cool that they just didn't put it out there. They were doing all this shit and not letting a lot of the dirt. I think the problem was they didn't let a lot of the dirty laundry out. There weren't any scandal. They were just...
Yeah, well,
and I think,
any scandals that the band had were more media created by fan created, like it wasn't real,
Yeah, it wasn't real.
One thing about Generation X that stood out among the other punk bands is they were very melodic. Okay, if you listen to them, the songs are very, very catchy. If anything, I would compare them maybe to the Buzzcocks more than any of the other bands.
The Buzzcocks are good too, and we did a show on them.
Yep, we did a great show on them. They, like I said, they were influenced by The Who. The Who was melodic. The Small Faces was an influence. They were melodic. So, their influences shone through more than other bands' influences. So, also, they focused their lyrics on kind of like adolescent things, teenage things, and like living in West London, growing up in the 70s. In that area was a topic that they would sing about a lot. A song called "Kiss Me Deadly" was a track.
Great song.
It's sort of a ballad. It touched on adolescent themes. They were, like I said, they were clearly less negative or nihilistic than some of the other bands, and they would get criticism for that. But I don't think they cared. They persevered. In late September, early October of '77, the band with producer Phil Wayman at Utopia Studios in North London prepared demos for their first full album. So now they're going to go in and do an album. To keep fans happy at that point, they in mid-November, they released the Wild Youth single, and its B-side had a song called Wild Dub. And it's one of the first attempts at kind of like mixing punk and reggae. The Clash had done it. They covered Police and Thieves around that time, a reggae song, and that was released as a single. Billy Idol himself was always a large reggae fan. He was very into that, and he admitted it. Unfortunately, Wild Youth and Wild Dub was really the only single that they ever released that didn't chart. It's a great song.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It just didn't chart. But if you listen to Wild Dub, it's an interesting mix of Wild Youth with kind of some reggae beats in the background and stuff. And, it's kind of like the first time they would mix rock, punk rock and reggae. Now,
and that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Not too many people were doing that. I mean, the Clash were at the forefront with that kind of. They would expand on that much later on. But Generation X was one of the only other bands. Subway Sect, they touched on some reggae. couple others, but most didn't do that. Even if they were big fans, they didn't go into it. But at the end of '77, John Ingham had a falling out with Tony James. He actually got into a fist fight with him. All right, and he would leave the band. I'll leave the management of the band. Now, Stuart Joseph at that point became their only manager in charge. Ingham at that point actually left the country and relocated to the United States. In February '78, Generation X released the Ready, Steady, Go single, with the B-side being a song called No, No, No.
Yep.
The Bubbles designed cover for the single was taken from a band T-shirt that he had designed as well. The single didn't quite make the top 40, but the band was very busy touring, very hectic touring schedule at that point.
But I think this band was definitely a very good live band to see. Like, they were
Yes,
very
yes.
engineering. They were like, they just had that chemistry for a live show, you know?
Idol was, he'd jump all over the place. It was very, very exciting. I've seen some footage of them playing the punk rock movie that was filmed by Don Letts. I think has some footage at the Roxy and a couple other places. Generation X is featured in it, and you can see he's just fucking great.
Yeah.
In March of '78, the first album entitled Generation X was released. It was actually, they ended up using producer Martin Rushent and recorded it at TW Studios in Fulham after the band decided they didn't want to work with Phil Wayman anymore. The album would get to number 29 on the UK album charts. In April, New Musical Express did a 2-page center spread on them. And it featured Billy Idol and Tony James on the River Thames beneath what's called the Embankment. It's like a famous spot. The way the picture was kind of shown in the magazine, they put Idol and James separate from the rest of the band, and a lot of people looked at that, kind of read some meaning into it, that the band was divided.
Yeah, break it up or
I don't know.
something.
To me, it just seems like nonsense. It was probably just the way they decided to do these 2 pages. Right? They opened it
Yeah.
up, and there's your 2 pages in the magazine. I don't know. I mean, it's obvious that Idol and James were the stars of the band. It's kind of like, like Richards and Jagger. Okay, you kind of like emphasize them. But in the picture, Mark Laff and Durwood Andrews were kind of like in a different picture to the side. And it just, it created like this mystery, like, oh, do these guys think they're like better than the rest of the band, or, something like that. But in May, the band went to the USA for the first time. Okay, they had a good short tour here in the States, and after that they ended up going to Paris in June to do some live BBC recordings again, like they had done the year earlier.
They loved them in the BBC.
Well, yeah, there's several BBC recordings that you could listen to of Generation X. They're very good.
Yeah.
In October, it was announced that Generation X would work with former Mott the Hoople frontman Ian Hunter as producer. Okay, he would be producing their second record. The move was criticized off the bat as kind of like a sellout, all right, or an attempt to go more mainstream. But Idol and James were like huge Mott the Hoople fans, and they just wanted to work with Ian Hunter. I mean, it was like a hero,
Yeah, it was definitely a hero.
Yeah. I mean, they were definitely influenced by Mott the Hoople. Another guy who loved Mott the Hoople was Mick Jones from The Clash.
Yep.
Okay, he was actually in something called the Mott Lot that would follow Mott the Hoople around. This was like 73, 74. They would follow them around, kind of like the Bromley contingent did with the Sex Pistols. But I don't know, the Clash never got any criticism for their influences. I guess it's just whatever. But the album, which would be called Valley of the Dolls, was definitely an evolvement of their sound.
Yeah.
But to me, it's not a sellout. In fact, I think it's their best album.
It was a good album. They got good songs in there.
They had like these like songs with lyrics about British life. There's a song called English Dream. I think they were kind of going in almost a Kinks direction
Yeah.
because they became way more British on that second album than they were on the first album. And it's just the Kinks are like so British on everything they do. All
Yeah.
right, so it just kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah. I also think they just got a lot of hate from the punk groups and stuff. You know,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
just
like
did it like
you're gonna go work with a rock star now. You're a sellout. You
yeah.
know, that was the problem with the UK punk scene. It got very like cliquey and elitist, and there were groups in there that weren't as open minded as they should be. If you listen to the first Generation X album, it's great.
Yeah.
Then you go to the second one, and it's like
Holy
you
shit.
can't even. It's like you can't even say like it's a sophomore jinx. Like the second album is not as good as
No.
the first. I think it's better. The songwriting evolved. They still had a punk edge,
Yeah.
okay, but it was like just expanded. The songs weren't that short; they were a little bit longer. I think there's even like there's one song that has like a part one and a part two. The
Yeah.
song Kenny Silvers, I believe it's called.
I'm almost consider them more like a rock band than a punk band in many ways, especially with that
Well,
second album. They
at
were
this
more
point, yeah, at this point they were kind of like, yeah, definitely a little less punk, a little more rock and roll.
yeah.
But I think it's a great album. Um, they would start having trouble at this point though with Chrysalis Records. In January of '79, manager Stuart Joseph was called into their offices and told that the label was not happy with the recent chart success of Generation X, all right, compared with the money that they were putting in. They've been through different producers. There was a lot, singles were coming out, and they felt that they basically told Stuart Joseph, if you guys don't have a hit on your next single, we're dropping you. Okay. So Joseph announced this to the band that, this was happening, and he cut their weekly wages, okay, as an incentive to make them work harder in the studio. And it worked because the next single they put out was called King Rocker, and it was off the Valley of the Dolls album. And the B side was a cover of John Lennon's "Give Me Some Truth." That was a live. It was a live recording of it, and
Yeah.
it ended up being a number 11 song. Got to number 11 in the UK. It was their biggest single. All right, but now you have to realize it was actually a little bit of a promotional trick behind this. What they did was they released 4 different versions of that single with different cover sleeves designed by Barney Bubbles. Each one was a picture of a band member and kind of like Generation X design and logo. And if you got all 4, you had all members of the band. It made kind of like a picture.
So
Okay.
that was pretty genius.
Right. So if you were a fan, you wanted to buy all 4, right? So that was a very smart thing to do because who knows if that single would have went to number 11 if everybody wasn't buying 4 at a time, right?
Yeah, but that's brilliant. You want
Yeah,
to
it
get
was.
each
It was.
album.
I don't think anybody in the punk scene had done anything like that.
You know what they should have done? They should have done that with that one song, but have a second. Every album had a different B-side song.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things you could do. You just have to. You got to have the backing of the record company to make something
Yeah.
like that too. They got to pay for all the, and it was actually colored vinyl too, which is always more expensive than regular black vinyl.
Yeah.
So, even though they had a hit single, the band's album sales for Valley of the Dolls was not that good. It only got to number 51.
Wow.
And for some reason, the critics didn't really like the album. They felt it was kind of overblown and artistically hollow. Again, I don't agree with that at all. I think it's their best work. But, people felt the album's concept and themes didn't register with people for some reason. But what happened was the poor performance of this album, it kind of created a problem in the band because Billy Idol was still writing most of the music. Tony James was writing most of the lyrics. And it kind of made Idol think like James is really not that good.
Yeah.
He started to lose confidence in his friend. And also, particular gigs were getting nasty. One particular they did in February of '79 after the album came out. They were on a triple bill with a band called the UK Subs being part of the bill.
Yeah, UK Sub
The
was a good
UK
band.
Subs were like a totally different thing. This was punk rock was starting to change in some ways in England from 79, 1980. You started having what would eventually be called the UK 82 scene. Bands like the UK Subs, GBH, um, Discharge, bands like that that were more street punk. More, I mean, the shows were more violent. This was when you started seeing people wearing spikes and chains and mohawks and stuff
Yeah,
like that. Okay, and Generation X were more. I don't want to say poppy. I don't know. They just had they were the opposite of that. Okay,
they were
and
very
there was a
poppy. They
gig
were
they
like,
did. There was a gig they did with the UK Subs where at the Lyceum Ballroom in England that they actually they had to leave the stage because they were being hit with so much shit from people in the audience. The UK Sub fans were throwing shit at them.
yeah,
Okay, so they had to leave the stage. Now the title track to Valley of the Dolls would peak at number 23 in March of '79, and then another single called Friday's Angels kind of died at number 62. And this created more problems in the band. It was kind of like a growing tension between Durwood, the guitarist, and
yeah.
Billy Idol. Uh, Billy Idol at this point was more increasingly getting into drugs, particularly heavy drugs like heroin and cocaine. And it was kind of like changing his personality a bit within the band. And Durwood was starting to butt heads with him. Also, Durwood would come at the band with songs, and they wouldn't listen to him.
Nah, they'd be
They
like,
wouldn't let him do any of his songs. He was also uh, getting interested in what would be known as like the indie rock scene that was starting at the time with bands like Joy Division.
yeah,
All right, Joy Division was becoming very popular. They were from Manchester. Um, they It was a little bit of a different sound, and Durwood was interested in it and kind of wanted to go in that direction with Generation X, but they didn't want to listen to him at all. Um, he just felt his ideas were never considered, basically. So by the end of the first tour of Japan that they did in 1979, manager Stuart Joseph left. Okay, he had some legal problems, some things happened. He ended up leaving the managing of the band. And the band at that point didn't have a manager, but they hit the Olympic Studios in the Barnes section, and they recorded a third album. They were going to start recording a third album, but everything came to a head within like 2 weeks after they started. Uh, Andrews quit right before Christmas.
yeah.
He had enough, and Laff. In the process they ended up firing him. All right, they ended
Wow.
up firing him. They felt he didn't fit in the band. Idol thought that Laff wasn't a good enough drummer. Laff said that they were stealing songs from him. That he wanted some songwriting credits, and
Wow.
yeah, so they had a big fight over that. During the Valley of the Dolls sessions, though, at one point, Ian Hunter told Billy Idol he didn't like Mark Laff's drumming, and he wanted to bring in a sessions drummer.
Okay.
And they actually did that on Valley of the Dolls. They actually brought in another guy. I don't know who it is. He's not credited, but he was brought in to do some of Laugh's drum parts that
Wow.
Ian Hunter felt wasn't good enough. And I think Ian Hunter was very influential on Billy Idol, and the fact that he didn't like Laff, he probably started to doubt Laff as well at that point. Now, the recordings they were working on though would be stopped, and the working title they had for it was called Sweet Revenge. Sweet Revenge was like kind of like a lost third Generation X album,
Yeah.
and it would be released 20 years later. Um, many years later, but it was way after the band had split up and Billy Idol had his own career.
Yeah,
They
they
would
were
put it out.
having problems already, but I think Billy Idol was already looking at becoming a single artist, you know?
Right, right. Now that's true. Andrews suspected that there was like rumors that he was going to leave the band and go solo. Um, they would do their very last gig as Generation X on November 30th, 1979, at a place called the Jamaican Club in Gloucester. That'd be their last gig. The band was kind of done at that point, but Idle and James wanted to go on. So they put a line out to the music press that Generation X broke up because Laff and Andrews tended to sound too much like Deep Purple.
Yeah, I saw that. I thought that
Okay,
was
so I
funny.
think that they were putting that out as some kind of, to control the narrative of it all, I guess, even though that wasn't the case. They recruited Terry Chimes on drums, who had worked with the Clash earlier and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was thinking
And
because he's familiar. He sounds very Terry
yeah,
Chung,
Terry
whatever.
Chimes
Yeah,
has played with a lot of people.
yeah,
And they ended up getting a new manager in American Bill Aucoin. Okay, now Bill Aucoin was very responsible with Kiss. Okay, for Kiss in America, he was a New York guy, I believe. Um, this was something that they thought would help them break in America. Okay, but in reality, Bill
Bill
Aucoin
had.
he only had his eyes on Billy Idol.
Yeah, he wanted a
Okay,
Billy Idol for the
we'll get into
American.
that. We'll get into that in a second. Now, in March of 1980, they found guitarist Steve New to play with them. Steve New was a member of the Rich Kids. He played with Glenn Matlock with the Rich Kids, a couple other bands. He was very well respected as a guitar player, but he also had a very bad reputation as a serious dope addict.
Yeah,
Okay, he was really in bad shape drug wise. They wanted to ask him to be a full member of they were calling themselves Gen X now.
yeah,
Okay, not Generation X. I have to mention that. But they were considering Steve New as a full-time member, but it just wasn't going to happen because Idle and James were like, no, this guy's too fucked up. So they went into Eel Pie Studios in the Soho section of England to start doing some demos. By mid-1980, they went into the AIR studios to re-record some of the Sweet Revenge songs that
yeah.
they had from the prior year. They also had some new songs to put out, to work on and record. But Bill Aucoin had these other plans. He wanted to bring Billy Idol to America as a solo artist. That was what he would eventually do. Okay, Chrysalis Records were told at this point by Bill Aucoin that if they funded the Gen X endeavor to make a new album in the studios, that he would give them Billy Idol as a solo artist, and that Billy Idol would be a big star in America. So I don't know how he convinced Chrysalis, but he did that he could do it.
Yeah, he
Okay,
definitely did.
yeah, and so they would what they did is, and what's strange about this, and I'm trying to remember Billy Idol's autobiography, which I read, which was pretty good. I don't know how much Gen X knew that this was the plan or not, like the other
I don't.
guys.
I don't think they
It
knew at
kind of it's
all.
kind yeah. I think they suspected something, but all of a sudden, they now they got the full cooperation of Chrysalis, and they give them several session musicians, including Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols, to be on
Wow.
the album. Okay. They also had John McGeoch, who played with Susie and the Banshees, and
Yep.
Danny Custo from the Tom Robinson band. So these were like very good guitar players that were brought in for a Gen X album. And again, Steve New was also brought in, but they really at that point didn't have an official guitarist in the band. But
Let me ask you:
uh,
do you think while they were doing these songs, that were Billy Idol was doing some single songs on the side with the band left? That's where they got so many good guitarists.
no, no, he wasn't recording anything separate. Um, let me just finish this, and we'll talk about
Yeah.
that because it's interesting what happened in the very first uh, American single from Billy Idol. But
Okay.
um, now the Kiss Me Deadly album. That's the third album. That's what we call Kiss Me
Yeah.
Deadly. In January of '81, Keith Forsey was brought in to produce that album, but it became like a shit show when they were recording this. Uh, there was so much heroin and cocaine going on between Steve New, Steve Jones, and Billy Idol
Oh.
that Tony James was just like fed up. He was like, the recording was slow, the process was slow, everybody was not all together. James didn't get along with Keith Forsey. Okay, so it was really falling apart in the making of that album. Ironically, even though Billy Idol was getting heavier into drugs, he was writing songs more on his own, away from Tony James, but he was writing songs like that were anti-drug. Okay, he wrote a song called "Happy People," which is about Valium use. Okay, he wrote a song called "Poison," which is sort of about heroin. Okay, and there was also a song called "Heaven's Inside" on that album that was kind of like about how they wanted to have Steve New in the band, but didn't want to ask him because he was too fucked up.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know what Billy Idol was thinking because he was probably just as fucked up as Steve New at that point. Okay.
But I think he knew he was fucked up.
Yeah, I guess maybe he was warning people. You know what I mean? But he would continue through the '80s. I mean, if you read Billy Idol's biography, autobiography, he doesn't even remember recording the Rebel Yell album.
And that's a great album.
That's how fucked up he was. Yeah, I mean that was the album that broke it open for him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't remember being. I mean, it was recorded here in the city. He doesn't remember. He said there was just so much. They were snorting so much dope. It was just the stories in the studios. It was just the studios were nothing but like drug parties and orgies. It's just nuts. Now, the one standout on that record, "Kiss Me Deadly," that you have to talk about, is the song "Dancing with Myself."
Yeah.
Okay, now it was released as a single by Gen X, but it tanked. It didn't go anywhere. That was a little bit of a different sound for them. That song, it was kind of like still punkish, but it was a little bit more poppy, quite a bit more poppy.
Yeah.
And that would be the song that they would release on an EP in America when Idol would leave. Now, before I get into that, they did take on ex-Chelsea guitarist James Stevenson after the album was released. Okay, they got him as a band member on guitar. They only did a few shows and basically broke up by February of '81 because at that point, Idol said, "Forget it, I'm breaking. I'm going to America." Bill Aucoin would take him to America. What he did was he basically took him, set him up in an apartment on the east side, kind of like near where you live. All right. He would live over there for a little while. And then he also had an apartment shortly after on Barrow Street in the West Village for a while. And Aucoin took him all over the East Village, the punk scene, CBGB's, Max's, Danceteria, places like that the whole underground scene was hanging out in. And they just introduced him as like the next big thing. And Dancing with Myself would be recut with a different band. He would have Steve Stevens on guitar. He'd be introduced to him when he got to America. Steve Stevens was the guy with the big black hair, that played guitar for him.
Yeah.
That EP that came out in, I want to say 1982, I think it finally came out when he had been to America. He had done Dancing with Myself. It was called "Don't Stop," the EP, and it had "Dance with Myself." I think a song called "Don't Stop." Trying to remember if "Money Money" was on there too. It was like an earlier version of "Money Money," and one other song I think, and that was it. I mean, it was no looking back after that.
Yeah, because Dancing with Myself was big.
Yeah, it was a big MTV hit.
Yeah, and you just see him on the roof.
Nobody realized the song's about jerking off.
Yeah.
That's all it's about. Okay. Tony James would go on to success in Sigue Sigue Sputnik in the '80s, and also he did a stint in Sisters of Mercy I mean, he was pretty good in that. They would get together years later and do a couple of reunion shows over the years, just kind of one-off things when Billy Idol was on tour and stuff like that. But I would love to see Generation X get back together and do an album. I would love to
Yeah,
see that.
because they got together on September 20th of 1993. They all got together for a one-off performance. You know?
Yeah, I think it was something like at the end of a Billy Idol tour. They just kind of
And
met
then
up.
on October 30th, Billy Idol, Tony James, and also with Steve Jones and Paul Cook, formerly of the Sex Pistols, they did a small gig at the Roxy in Hollywood.
Yeah, what was the name of that? Was it Generation Sex?
Yeah, Generation Sex.
Yeah, that was like they did Generation X and Sex Pistols songs.
Yeah,
because Steve Jones was in the Sex Pistols,
which I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty clever. You know, so that's Generation X, guys. I think that they're one of the most important of the UK punk bands. Some people don't take them seriously, but I think they're fucking great. I think they were one of the best ones.
I just think they were like their own bedfellows. Like they were on their own journey. They didn't care about the rest of the. They weren't. So they were like the one that they were outside of the establishment. They were part of the establishment, but nobody wanted them in the establishment. But they had their own fans and they made their own music. And what else can you say about them? You know?
Yeah, I mean. Billy Idol's one thing about him, and I kind of got a soft spot for Billy Idol. He's corny, you know, and some of his stuff is not that good. But the first album, the first solo album with Dance with Myself and White Wedding and stuff like that's pretty good.
White Wedding is fantastic.
Yeah. You know, Rebel Yell is. I look back at it fondly. It's not the greatest album, but it's. I mean, it broke open for him. I mean, everybody loved it.
Yeah.
But you know, he's one of these guys. Like, if I see him on TV, I watch. If I catch something, I'll on the internet, I'll look at it. He's always kind of acknowledged Generation X. Like he always would do the song "Kiss Me Deadly" live, which is cool. Dance with Myself started out as a Generation X song. And he would always do like 2 or 3, maybe Your Generation, Ready, Steady, Go. He's done that, you know, with his solo band. So it's cool that he acknowledges it, you know.
It got him his start, you know. It's always funny how you see him like in Wedding Crasher and the Goldbergs, which I think is funny.
And how about what was the Adam Sandler movie?
Wedding
the
Crasher.
Wedding Singer. The Wedding Singer.
Wedding Singer, yeah, Wedding Singer.
Yeah,
he was
at the end when they're on the plane and Billy Idol's on the plane. That's fucking funny. That was funny.
You know what? So I think maybe in the future we'll do like a show just about Billy Idol, I guess.
Yeah, we could. I mean,
it'll be a short one, but
yeah, I mean, I'd like to do like a making of the Valley of the Dolls album. I think that's interesting.
That'd be interesting.
With Ian Hunter, you know, try to put together a little show about that. Yeah, I mean,
Ian Hunter
talk about the making of Rebel Yell. I mean, it's all just debauchery.
I can see that because there was shit going on there. There was more drugs and sex and shit. Like that was a real rock and roll story. You want to talk about a rock and roll story?
Yeah, I mean, what's mentioned in the Idol book often is just like they doesn't even remember half the shit. It's just I don't know how he wrote the book. He must have had to ask a lot of people like what happened.
Wow. Hey mate, do you remember this? I have no idea what you're talking about.
I got no idea.
That would be like one of our nights. What the hell happened? I have no idea.
If you read the book, it's amazing how much really what he did, and he like almost died a couple of times, and like that was never mentioned in the press.
Wow.
Okay, I mean he was so huge. You would think like if he almost died from drugs, you'd hear about it, but they covered that up.
They probably did.
I mean, I can remember seeing him at the MTV Music Awards in the 80s, like 84, 85, 86.
Oh, he was lumped up.
He was coked out of his mind. His eyeballs looked like saucers.
Yeah.
You know? And nobody said nothing.
Nobody said that.
It's Billy Idol. So, well, that's all I got for you today, Mr. Rossi.
Pretty good show, Mike. Generation X, pretty exciting. And then I think the next person we have next week, the next
I
show
think,
we
yeah,
doing,
it's about some Irish punk bands, I think.
yeah, it's
Uh,
what the
Stiff
hell
Little
is it?
Fingers and the
Simply Finger and
Undertones.
the Undertones.
Yeah,
Yes,
we got two bands to talk about next
two
week.
bands
Yeah.
about. So we pretty much just finished October, and the next time the show is November 2nd.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this one we went Facebook Live, everybody, so you're getting a little glimpse of it. It'll be re-released again at the end of October. And I just want to remind everybody on the Rock Show podcast group page, please vote for the December schedule. Okay, if you're watching right now in September, I'm taking votes all through September to try to schedule that show. So pick a band you want, let me know. It's on the Rock Show group page. Information about it, just put in the comments the band you want us to talk about, and we'll do that.
Yep, and Mike, how can they get in touch with you then?
Okay, you could find me on Instagram, RockerMike212, RockerMike212, RockerMike3 on Twitter, and also on the Facebook, Michael Baker, and of course on the Rock Show podcast group page on Facebook.
And
And Rob,
definitely on Twitter, they should definitely follow you because you put like song of the day. You put a lot of
Rocker
you're
Mike
very,
3 on Twitter. Yeah, I do song of the day. Well, it's I do that all on the group page as well. But
you do
join
it
on Twitter.
everywhere, yeah. Because I see
stick
you
it
log me
everywhere.
every few hours I get a Twitter message, Rocker Mike, it's song of the day or this and that.
Yeah,
And me, you can reach me at anything lumped up. You can also get me in the Rock Show fan page on Facebook. And pretty much, if you look up, you'll be shocked if you go on Google and you look lumped up and you see all the shows come out. And we're probably like on 400 different platforms where you can get the podcast. So you know
right.
what? We're just moving along and making this thing grow. Hopefully soon. You know what? We'll get some sponsor, and the show is just going to evolve, and it's getting bigger and better. We're getting about 400-500 downloads per show, so you know what? That's pretty good so far. And
Yeah,
just with the whole network, like the whole lumped up thing, we get like about 3,000 hits a week, which is pretty good.
right, right. And can't forget the original show, the Freak Show. It's doing
The
well
Freak
too.
Show, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
it's like a lumped up network, and we work a lot of stuff. You know what show I'm looking forward to? Lester Banks show. I think that's going to be a fantastic
yeah,
show.
yeah, yeah. Definitely, I'm looking forward to doing that. The next 2 weeks should be interesting.
Yeah. All right, Mike. So see you later. Let's sign off, and we'll see you next week.
And remember,
Don't get drunk. Get
drunk,
lumped up.
get lumped up.
See you later. Have a good one.
Take care, people.